Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're looking beyond the usual talk about formal training. We want to get into how real learning actually happens at work.
That's right. We're exploring something called workplace pedagogic practices.
And
We're
specifically,
digging into a really influential paper by Stephen Billett from 2002. It lays some important groundwork for understanding how work itself offers up learning opportunities.
okay, so for everyone listening, maybe you've seen colleagues just, skyrocket while others seem stuck, even with similar starting points.
Yes, exactly.
That's what we're unpacking. So, what's the absolute core idea we need to grab onto today?
The key concept is co-participation. It's basically the idea that learning isn't something that just happens to you passively.
Okay.
It's more like a dynamic relationship, a kind of interaction between what the workplace offers, the opportunities, the guidance, and how you, the individual worker, choose to engage with it.
Right, so it's a two-way street. And that explains why outcomes can be so different.
Precisely. Even for people doing very similar jobs, it's about that interplay between the offer and the choice.
That feels really important because we often just label workplace learning as informal, like it's accidental.
Yeah, and the source material argues strongly against that. Informal sounds unplanned, maybe even unimportant, but this learning is deeply structured.
Structure how?
Well, it's shaped by the history of the place, the culture, the specific situation, things that have built up over time. It's suggesting learning is inherently social. Interpsychological is the term used.
Meaning it comes from interacting with others, not just reading a manual.
Exactly. It's developed socially, and it's definitely not something that only happens in schools or universities.
Okay, let's get into the why. Why is it so important to understand this workplace pedagogy, this structure right now? What's the urgency?
There are some really practical reasons. First, workplaces are super effective for learning the core stuff of a job, right?
Yeah.
But those experiences often have well-known limits. They might be too narrow or inconsistent, or maybe even biased in who gets the good learning opportunities.
And the second reason,
This is maybe the big one.
Right.
So many people, the workplace is basically the only place they'll get ongoing development throughout their career. Think about lifelong learning policies.
they rely heavily on this happening effectively at work.
They really do. So there's this urgent need to figure out a workplace pedagogy that actually builds robust skills,
Robust meaning.
meaning skills that are adaptive, skills that let workers handle changes in their job or in the company without needing constant formal retraining. They learn how to learn from the work itself.
So it's about building adaptability right into the job structure. Makes sense. And beyond the practical skills, there's a deeper theoretical angle too.
Absolutely. Understanding how we learn through work helps us get a better handle on sociogenesis.
Sociogenesis. Okay, break that down a bit.
It's essentially the link between how we think, how we act, and the social world we're in. This research sees learning not just as like soaking up the company culture.
Not just fitting in.
Right. It's co-constructive. It's formed through that constant back and forth between our own thoughts and experiences and what's happening socially around us.
Which brings us right back to that core engine, co-participation, the meeting point. Could you define it one more time with those two key parts?
Sure. It's that reciprocal link between the affordance of the work, that's what the workplace makes available, the invitation, and the individual's engagement, how they choose to take up that invitation.
The quality of learning depends on both sides being strong.
Exactly.
Okay, let's focus on the workplace side first. Affordance, the invitation. This sounds like more than just, here's the training material.
Oh, much more. Affordance covers the kinds of tasks you get to do, routine stuff versus new challenging things, and crucially, the actual guidance and support you can access.
And you mentioned this invitation isn't always open to everyone equally.
That's a key insight. The source points out this invitational quality is often really contested. It's shaped by things like company hierarchy, who's friends with whom, team dynamics, cultural biases.
So the chance to learn the really valuable stuff might depend on office politics, not just ability.
That's often the reality. Who gets invited to participate in high-level learning can be restricted based on factors completely unrelated to their potential.
Can you give us some examples of how this affordance gets distributed or restricted?
Sure. On the positive side, the paper mentions practices in some Japanese companies where supervisors actively see it as their job to develop their team members.
Yeah.
They consciously think, okay, who would really grow from tackling this new project? That's structured affordance.
That's deliberate, supportive affordance. But the flip side exists too.
It does, unfortunately. Restrictions are common. One study found full-time retail workers actively kept part-timers away from more complex, skill-building tasks.
Why? To protect their own jobs.
Essentially, yes. They limited the affordance for others out of kind of self-preservation. And another example was a computer company where the design engineers were treated like heroes.
Lots of support, resources.
Exactly. While the production staff, doing really complex work themselves, were largely ignored, denied similar support. The affordance was heavily skewed towards the high-status group.
Wow. Okay, that highlights the workplace's role. Now let's look at the other side, individual engagement, the worker's choice.
Right. So engagement isn't automatic. It's filtered through our personal histories, our ontogenies, as the source calls it. These shape how we see and interpret the workplace.
Meaning our past experiences influence how willing we are to jump in.
Precisely. And a key idea here is something called relatedness. How closely do your personal values and beliefs actually align with the values and norms you see operating in the workplace?
So if I feel like the company's values clash with mine, or if I don't trust the way things are done, I might hold back, even if a learning opportunity looks good on paper.
That's exactly it, which leads to a useful distinction between mastery and appropriation.
Okay, what's the difference?
Mastery is basically knowing how to do something. You've learned the skill, but maybe without any real personal commitment. You haven't made it your own.
Just going through the motions.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Whereas appropriation is when you willingly take on that knowledge, you construct it actively because it resonates with your interests or beliefs. You're taking it as your own.
That's huge. It means how we feel about the learning, its purpose, who it serves, that matters as much as the content.
It really does. This explains why sometimes workers push back against training that seems beneficial.
Like the coal miner example.
Exactly. The miners in that study rejected a safety training program, not because they didn't care about safety, but because they felt the real purpose was for the company to shift liability onto them.
So their value, maybe corporate accountability, clashed with the perceived company value, avoiding responsibility. They refused to appropriate it.
Perfectly put. Their agency was based on that values conflict. And there's an even more striking example involving cultural history.
The manufacturing plant.
Yes, where mandatory teamwork was introduced. Workers who had come from South Vietnam strongly resisted it.
Why? Teamwork sounds positive.
They saw the forced collectivism as echoing the communist values they had fled their home country to escape. Their deeply ingrained personal history, their ontogeny, created a fundamental conflict with the workplace practice.
So the personal meaning completely overrode the intended organizational meaning. That powerfully shows the choice side of co-participation.
It really does. You can offer the best learning resources imaginable, but if it clashes with the individual's core values or experiences, that engagement just won't happen. The learning door stays closed.
Okay, to really see this co-participation dynamic play out, let's talk about that manufacturing study mentioned in the source. It looked at a learning model across 3 very different parts of a company, right?
Yes, a great real-world test. The study tried to implement a learning model involving everyday work, guided coaching, and learning for transfer across 3 areas: customer service, manufacturing extrusion, and packaging.
Was there any common challenge across all 3?
Yes, the familiar suspects: time and production pressures. These consistently made it hard for managers to really dedicate time to intentional coaching or guided learning. That was a common constraint.
But the results differed wildly anyway, because of the co-participation mix.
Absolutely. The differences were stark, really illustrating the power of affordance and engagement.
Tell us about customer service first, the high performer.
Right. This area was kind of the ideal setup. High affordance, high engagement. It was an all-female team, all on the same day shift. They had good relationships, high collegiality, and regular team meetings.
So the social structure supported learning.
Definitely. And crucially, their motivation was high because they wanted to be seen as effective, valued members of the team. The shared goal reinforced engagement.
And the result?
They used the guided learning strategies the most and reported the best learning outcomes.
Wow.
The workplace offered a strong communal invitation, and they accepted enthusiastically because it aligned with their values.
Okay, now contrast that with the manufacturing area extrusion.
Almost the polar opposite. Low affordance, low engagement. This is all male. Spread across 3 rotating shifts in a noisy environment that physically made communication and coaching difficult.
So the affordance was low just from the physical setup.
Partly, yes, But also, there was a lot of cynicism and suspicion among the workers, and they saw limited chances for promotion within that specific area.
So motivation was different.
Very different. It was much more individualistic, focused on maybe getting a specific certification for personal gain or trying to get transferred out of the area rather than improving the team.
The environment bred isolation, killing the affordance, and the engagement reflected that lack of hope.
That's a good way to put it. The invitation was weak, the engagement was low and individualistic, and consequently, they had the lowest use of the learning strategies.
And the third area, packaging, is interesting because things changed mid-study.
Yes, this is where you really see the reciprocal nature shine through. Initially, the packaging area looked promising. Small, newly formed teams, workers felt positive about management, and there were actual prospects for promotion.
So initial affordance and engagement were pretty good.
Very good. Workers were highly engaged early on. They were actively appropriating good practices like they'd fix production problems immediately without being told, just to ensure a smooth handover to the next shift. Real ownership.
Sounds great. What happened? What broke that positive cycle?
Management pulled back the affordance. Specifically, funds for training were cut, and crucially, overtime hours were reduced, which the workers had relied on.
So the company signaled it wasn't willing to invest in them anymore.
Exactly. That change in organizational affordance, the withdrawal of investment and fair compensation for their commitment had an immediate effect. The workers' views became much more critical, cynical, and their commitment to using the guided learning practices dropped off sharply.
Wow. So the company changed the invitation and the workers changed their response. You can't demand engagement if you reduce the affordance.
It shows how delicate that balance is. Co-participation isn't static. It depends on the ongoing integrity of that workplace invitation.
Okay, this really highlights the complexity. If we want to actually improve workplace learning, we need a way to analyze these factors systematically. The source offers a framework for that, right?
Yes, drawing on socio-historical activity theory, Billett proposed a scheme to classify work practices. It helps predict potential learning outcomes by looking at two dimensions: the activities themselves and the interdependencies surrounding them.
Let's take dimension one, activities. This is about the work itself.
Correct. It describes the actual tasks and their demands. We look at things like routineness, is it the same thing every day or constantly changing? This affects whether learning is just refinement or something new.
Okay. What else?
Discretion. How much autonomy or decision-making power does the worker have? Intensity, managing workload, juggling multiple tasks. Multiplicity, the sheer variety of different tasks involved.
In complexity.
Complexity, yes, dealing with tricky variables, needing to negotiate solutions. And finally, accessibility or opaqueness of knowledge. How easy is it to actually get the know-how needed for the job?
That's a lot to consider for just one job. The grief counselor example helped make that concrete.
It did. It showed how a job can be technically routine. The core task is similar each time, but still have incredibly high intensity from the emotional load and high complexity because every case is unique.
And high discretion within their professional boundaries, unlike, say, a mortuary attendant with stricter procedural limits.
Exactly. Different activity profiles, different learning potentials.
Okay, then dimension two, interdependencies. This is the social context.
Yes, this focuses on the interactions and resources. Things like working with others. Is it teamwork, solo, client-facing? Engagement basis, are they full-time, part-time contract? That affects commitment and access.
What else?
The status of employment. How valued is the work perceived to be? Access to participation. What influences who actually gets the chance to do certain tasks? Reciprocity of values, the potential for shared beliefs we talked about.
Relatedness again.
Yes. Also, homogeneity of tasks. If others do similar work, there's more chance for modeling and support. And lastly, artifacts, external tools, access to the necessary physical equipment, software, information, etc.
It's clear this framework pushes way beyond just saying skilled or unskilled work. It maps out how the work structure and the social environment enable or hinder learning.
Precisely. It gives us tools to analyze why learning happens or doesn't happen in a specific context.
So wrapping this deep dive up, the fundamental takeaway really is this concept of co-participation. It moves us away from thinking about workplace learning like school.
Right, away from just importing educational models.
And forces us to see it as this constant negotiation. It's mediated by what the workplace offers, the affordance, and how the individual chooses to respond, the engagement based on their own history and values.
That reciprocal dynamic is absolutely central. And, this leads to a really important final thought for you, the listener, to consider.
Okay.
The source material strongly suggests that with all the constant change, the disruption in today's economy,
Mm,
truly simple, routine work is basically disappearing, is becoming extinct.
that feels true. Every job seems to demand more adaptability now.
It does. So if almost every job requires workers to handle change, to use more judgment, to operate with less rigid routine, it poses a really big question for all of us.
Which is,
Should we still be thinking in terms of some workers needing only low-level preparation? If adaptability and continuous learning are becoming baseline requirements,
hmm,
doesn't that imply that higher-order thinking, critical skills, the capacity to learn and adapt are now essential for everyone in the workforce, regardless of their job title?
that's a powerful question to end on. Rethinking who needs higher order skills in a constantly changing world. A fantastic deep dive. Thank you for unpacking all that.
It was my pleasure. It's crucial stuff to think about.